Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
The meeting of the fly board for the village of Saxtons River, village of Bellows Falls, and the town of Rockingham. We are in the lower theater. There's a Zoom link and a phone number that you can't get on the link. Call in, hopefully somebody will answer the phone. So with that being said, I would call this meeting to order, and the first item is agenda, if we could beg the indulgence of the two village boards. We have three liquor commissions, three liquor licenses that need to be approved tonight because they can't wait till our meeting on the 16th. First is Chow Popwell, first class restaurant bar license, and the third class restaurant bar license. 13 Burgers, first class restaurant bar license. That's what is part 13 is in Saxtons River currently. And Vermont Vines on the River, special events permit. So, had a motion from one of the front boards.
So moved.
Motion's been made, and we have a second. Second. Motion made and seconded to approve the three liquor licenses as mentioned. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries, and we're coming around for signature. Right? Now we get into the regular meeting. Thank you for your indulgence. Approval for a meeting of minutes of January 31st, 2023. Take a motion to approve the minutes or disapprove them or whatever.
So moved.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
A second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes of January 31st, 2023. Any discussion, corrections, deletions, omissions? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Additions to the agenda for routine administrative matters and or pressing matters that will require ratification in a future meeting. I have none.
Just one item, wanted to see if the board would be willing. Vermont DOT has a small scale local safety grant program that we just got wind of. And it's 100% funded through DOT, and it would be eligible to do the additional painting that we've talked about on Rockingham Street, so that pedestrian strip. So the only thing we have to do as a board is agree to maintain it once it's potentially funded. So since it's a competitive application, I was hoping maybe the board would approve it, then we put it on your next meeting or a publicly noticed meeting, but at least we'll get our application into for consideration.
And that's just for the town, correct?
Just for the town.
So that being said, someone want to make the motion?
I enthusiastically move that we apply for the grant and consider it at our next meeting.
So it's the small scale local safety grant, and we were going to ask for $7,500, and there is no local match.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, motion made and seconded to approve the application for the painting. Any more discussion, questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
When you said just for the town, would you?
Yeah, it's a town highway. It's probably painting in Bellows Falls, isn't it?
We have to
It's a
maintain.
white box somewhere around the Dairy Joy or something, I think.
Select board, I think is.
Yeah, just like.
It's the sidewalk that runs from the Legion down to Walgreens. We're going to indicate what is the sidewalk and what is the road.
Okay. So, that being said, over discussion, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you for that.
Okay, public comment on the items not on the agenda. No, I see none, no hands coming up. Oh, there's one flapping over
I have
there.
one, of course. I just want to, June 10th, the Bellows Falls Festival, the BFF. It's at the Waypoint Center, 1 to 10. Live music, there's food trucks, beer. There's going to be a performance from Keen Pride. There's going to be a closing ceremony by Wild Goose Players. So tickets are available online, bellowsfallsfestival.org.
Hey, anyone else? All right, let's move along to the manager report.
So we're into construction season. I'm sure if you've been up on Center Street, you'll notice that they've started the sidewalk work and started pouring the sidewalks in preparation for the paving that'll be following. I'm happy to report that the utility companies have actually moved their utilities off those 4 poles. So we'll be able to get those 4 poles actually removed before we do paving. So that's almost a historic announcement.
Yes, it is.
More so than paving. That doesn't happen. So we're very happy with that. And actually Green Mountain Power has been pushing the other utility companies. And so we appreciated their help and cooperation. So we've established the model. I'm kind of hoping now maybe we can do it in more locations, so we can get rid of a lot of these double poles and things that are sort of cluttering up the right of way.
Yeah, well, they're in town, you know.
And so it's a good start. You should be noticing soon, Betsy's been working hard with DOT to update and create a blog specifically for the Depot Bridge project and all the impacts along the downtown. So that is going to be launching. We have a final meeting, I think next week, and then we're hoping to go live. And really the goal of that is to try to keep as much information, especially for impacted folks in the downtown, up to date as possible. So people have a real schedule, a real, understanding what's happening, and a place to have concerns, complaints, a way to communicate outside of, somebody who's digging a hole in front of your business and disrupting, your basic daily living. So it worked pretty well the last time they did this on a big project that they did in Middlebury. So this was funded as part of the bridge reconstruction project. So we're looking forward to that one as well.
Okay, anyone on any of the boards would like that? Yes,
I just
sir.
have a question about the paving schedule. Has that been established or?
We're hoping to start milling the end of June. So we tentatively have that set up for June 30th.
But as far as street by street,
We'll have it so that we'll put placards on doors and let people know. So it's all weather dependent. If he stays, right now he's maintaining his schedule because the weather's been very cooperative. So we have our fingers crossed that works.
Anyone else? Go down into the main agenda and the first
Oh, hang
item.
on, I got Jamie Barrett's got his hand up, I think.
Jamie, you got something?
Good evening. Scott, just a question on Center Street and the sidewalks there. I know that's part of the discussion over the next couple of years on sidewalks and everything, but how do we pick and choose with upcoming paving projects of what sidewalks are going to get attention and which are not? Because I know there's a lot of scheduled activity up here on the terrace. Pretty narrow streets. The sidewalks are in pretty poor condition. If we're not going to address them prior to, coming up to mill and repave, why don't we think about taking some sidewalks out here? Because they're unsafe now. There's a lot of sidewalks that are just heaved up from tree roots and everything else. I know it's going to end up at some point somewhere down the road, maybe somebody will look at the sidewalks, but it'll ruin all the paving that we're getting ready to do now.
Well, Center Street was a little bit of an issue just because of drainage concerns and the way the driveways met the street elevations. We had to reset the sidewalk heights in order to fix some of the problems there. So that was done preemptively, more so than a condition of what the actual sidewalks were. They weren't in the worst condition in town, but they certainly needed to be redone. The board's going to be working, we're hoping to work with Wyndham Regional to update our 2019 sidewalk inventory. And that's going to be a more comprehensive inventory than what we currently have, Jamie. And then I think the board's going to use that guidance to help decide some decisions on budget and how much sidewalk they can potentially fund, hopefully in a 5-year funding window. So more to be determined. I don't disagree that there are problems and there are areas that need attention. It's a deferred maintenance problem and we can't catch up to it all in one cycle. But I think the board's committed to doing it and doing it in a thoughtful way. And we'll hopefully get lots of input from folks as we go forward with this too, so.
All right, well, I just appreciate that we're actually gonna, address some drainage issues up here on this terrace with the bank that goes down over to Pine Street and everything, because 32 years waiting for something to happen. I'm glad that finally something's moving forward. So thank you.
That's great.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess when you just mentioned you want more input, what forms will that take? Are there gonna be more public forums or just get in touch with your office? about
Probably on the
sidewalk
sidewalk project, more than likely we'll have a public meeting where it'll be in a dedicated presentation and a follow-up, and we'll work with our walk bike committee. They've been very engaged in this, so I think they want to continue being, you know, sort of the push on this, so we'll probably do it once we get something really sort of finalized, hopefully with Wyndham Regional here soon. So.
Hey, Matt.
Does this include Saxon's River?
It does include Saxon's River. And we are actually gonna do some sidewalk work in Saxon's River this paving cycle as well. So, but again, the deferred maintenance is as difficult there than it is in town. Yep.
Okay, anyone else? That was part of the Redwood report. The housing committee.
Yep, so I'm gonna make Gary our host, and then I think he's got the presentation on his machine. And hopefully then that'll help. Gary, there we go. Ta-da.
All right, let's do a check and make sure it's not advancing. Are you in slideshow presentation here?
No, it's a PDF, it's not a, that's not gonna work.
Okay. Any chance that we can get it as a Google? Did you happen to send him a link or no, just a PDF?
I think I just sent him a copy of the actual PDF.
Okay. All right. All right, this, we'll make some adjustments on the fly. So thank you for having us again. I'm representing Ridwig, for those of you that are new to the board's Rockingham Incremental Development Working Group. And we're a group of community members. We don't think of ourselves as experts in any of these fields, but we are people who live, work, invest time and other resources in the community. We really care about the community and want to see it thrive. So we took it upon ourselves to just tackle some of the challenges that face our community. So we've done several presentations. I'll review them briefly. Next slide, Gary, please. So we're going to look at risks and opportunities. So again, the objective is just to really encourage all of us to think of different ways of heading off some of these challenges that we have. And this quote on the right there, land is the base resource from which community prosperity is built and sustained. It must not be squandered. So that's really the premise of all of this. There's a finite amount of land that we have, and how we treat that land and what we do with that land will determine whether we have a prosperous community or whether we continue to struggle in perpetuity. So next slide, please. In September, we presented the Vermont Housing Finance Association Housing Needs Assessment. Those of you that have been on the board were there in September should have a copy of it. I have 5 additional copies here if anybody wants to look at it. But some of the highlights, we have a declining number of households. The home values for non-vacation homes are below county and state median. We're approximately 25% below the county median and approximately 36% below the state median. Our incomes are below the state and median, the county and state medians. Those are for Rockingham, $43,000 median income, $52,000 for Wyndham County, and $62,000 for the state. Our homes are also some of the oldest in the state. 58% of the housing stock in Rockingham was built prior to 1940. And I think for the entire state, it was like 30% or something. So it was significantly older here in this town. We're almost equal between renters and owners. And the type of home does not match the need. So 38% of the households in Rockingham are one-person households, but only 17% of the homes are one bedroom or studio. So we have way too many single people looking for housing and not enough homes for them. Next slide, please. In November, Jennifer Stromson from BDCC came and talked about tax shield per acre. We'll touch on that a little bit today. And looked at population density and building density. Just, you know, for clarification, building density is the amount of land covered by structures. And that is impacted by things like setbacks, height requirements, parking requirements. Population density is driven by the housing types. So the number of units, the unit size, housing availability, and household size. So one graphic that Jen shared was on the right there, you see 100 squares, 100 blocks. In 1965, there were 4 people per household. So there were 400 residents, or sorry, 4 people in 1965 per household. So that's 400 people living in those 100 homes. In 2022, the census data told us that there was 2.5 people per household in this town. So we're down 150 residents just because of the demographic change. Now, if we lose 10 of those homes because of fire or neglect, they get torn down, we're losing another 25. So primarily because of demographics, the vibrancy of this community has decreased simply because we've gotten older, with fewer people living in the town, all those things that impact how many people are moving to this town or leaving. So next slide, please. In January, we came and just did a short presentation about Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust funding. We did a walkabout with the Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust and some of the grant money that was available to help bring some of these homes up to current code or bring offline apartments up and bring them online. So we looked at the amount of money that was invested, about 300,000, 260,000 plus came in as local income. That's the money, 300,000 that was spent, ended up going to people in the community to do the work. We also saw lots of empty lots and vacant homes. And so we looked at that as a lost opportunity that this town has. So that's why I'm here tonight, to talk to you a little bit about that. So next slide. We also had some other Ridwig events since last time we were here in front of you. We did a discussion on neighborhoods with the Historical Society. So we talked about what did neighborhoods look like back in the day. And then in April, we had a meet and greet for new people that moved to the community, have them come in and meet some of the people that have been in the community for a little while. And that was a very successful event. It was great to see some new people, find out why they're moving here, find out some of the challenges they have moving here as well. Next slide, please. So how do we solve the housing crisis? Rising taxes, decline of our buildings, reduced vibrancy, lack of jobs. Next slide, Gary. So all of these challenges that I brought up are an interconnected web of challenges. And I would argue that housing is the center of that web. If we can make advances in the housing, then likely all of those other things will also improve as well. So I feel like, and many people do feel like housing is the big thing. You ask any number of business owners in the area and finding employees, housing is one of the reasons why they lose them, because there isn't housing here for new people to come in. High paying jobs, and in some cases, several $100,000 income jobs, and they're not moving here. Or some are, some aren't. It depends on whether they can find housing. So this slide, what I did, this is not a, this was my knowledge of the Bellows Falls Village and I marked off what I saw as an empty lot. So that is on the tax map. If there was a lot and there was not a building on it, that's an empty lot. A vacant house would be something that's not being lived in and either neglect or just left there. Work in progress were the purple stars there. So I had 11 empty lots, 7 vacant houses, 3 works in progress. And those are, works in progress are houses that aren't occupied but are having work done on them. There's a plan. Go ahead, Gary, next slide, please. So I want to talk about assessed value per acre a little bit. This is a site that you can go on. The link is at the bottom there. It's a state map, and it's looking at the assessed value per acre for the entire state. You can go, every single tax parcel is in here. So this is Bellows Falls. And in that, the top one here that we see is the category is utility. So that's your hydropower plant. That has a value of $8,357,756. That was the assessed value. So on a value per acre, that comes in at 12.8 million per acre. The next one down is a commercial apartment. That had an assessed value of 191,000. Its value per acre is 1.2 million. Commercial property that it's pointing to down here is your wastewater treatment facility, that section. That's 10,200,000 is the value. Its value per acre is 1.229 million. And then there's an empty lot. We'll look into some of these in a moment. That's less than $1,400 value. Its value per acre is under 20,000. So we're looking at value per acre is 12 million, 2 million, 1 million, and 20,000 for that one. And then I looked at a residential area up on Grizzle Drive, Recircle area, that had $132,000 value. Value per acre was 322. So it's an interesting map to look at. It's a different way to look at the town and the buildings that we have and the value that we place on, not because of our tax system, it places value on the building, not on the land itself. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at a couple of parcels. 38 Green Street. I identified just my memory of there being a house there, and then there wasn't. Now there is. And I wanted to see what impact does it have when we lose a house and it sits vacant for any length of time. And as an aside, just out of curiosity this afternoon, I couldn't remember when this house burned. It was today, 7 years ago. So the 2012 street view there, you can see the Cape style house there. It had in today's dollars, if I looked at the value of the next door neighbor, which as you're looking at the house to the left, similar house, similar lot, had a $116,000 appraised value. So that would equate to $1,300 in town taxes, $721 in village taxes. If we go to 2021, when there was an empty lot there, it had a value of $10,000. It was only bringing in taxes of $118 a year, and the village tax was $65. So $12,000 over 10 years we would lose by having a lot go from occupied to vacant. The village would lose $6,560 over a 10-year period. Fortunately, this lot has been redeveloped. Not all lots do end up getting redeveloped, and we need to look at what value are we losing when we lose a property like that. Next slide. Sorry, I didn't mention the value per acres. Gary, if you'll just reduce that a little bit. I think this $466,000, when it had a house on it, it was $466,000 value per acre. When it was an empty lot, it was $42,000 value per acre. And the next slide, please. 42 Green Street, just a couple doors down. I remembered this having a triple-decker apartment building on it. It had been torn down, I think in 2015, I think is when the town had that demolished. And it is now an empty lot, and I believe the adjacent property owner purchased it. So if an estimated value of 110,000 in today's dollars would have meant a $1,200 town tax revenue, $680 for village. Right now, you're getting $16 in taxes from that parcel a year and $9 for the village. So again, it's in the $12,000 for a town loss over a 10-year period, $6,700 for the village. Now, someone could say, if we go to the next slide, and again, looking at that value per acre, you'll see a $1.5 million when it had a building on it to a lot less than that as an empty lot. But some might say to go from having a building on it to a vacant lot, well, that's going to improve, particularly if it was a blighted property, that's going to improve the property values of the adjacent properties. Those 4 homes that are adjacent to that, the one in front, behind, left and right, and 2 of those are across the street, those would have to increase in value by 108,000. And that would, there's a typo here. It's actually a 25% increase for the town tax and a 25% increase for the village tax. So it would be interesting to find out from the listers whether they have data that supports that a building that is demolished or burns and it's left as an empty lot, and that lot gets split. One half goes to that neighbor and one half goes to the other neighbor, whether that actually increased the value of those properties enough to make up the lost revenue to the town and village. I'm skeptical that that is the case, but this would mean if we wanted to make up that $108,000 value to get the tax money back, each of those property owners, those 4 property owners, their taxes would increase $300 a year for the town and each, and then about $168 each for village taxes. Next slide. So now let's go outside the village and look at Parker Hill Road. There's approximately 1,207 acres. I just looked at what parcels, what lots are on each side of Parker Hill Road. So we didn't go back at all, but 1,207 acres, that's about 37 properties, 37 lots on Parker Hill. And it's about 3 miles, I think, from Route 103 at the bottom up to the town line with Springfield at the top. Appraised value was $9,863,000. That's about an $8,200 value per acre. Tax revenue based on current tax rate of 1.129 is $111,000 in total town tax. That's $92 of tax revenue per acre. If we then go to the next slide, we'll look at a couple of in-town lots. So I looked at Atkinson Street. Atkinson Street is at the bottom in the top image. Green Street at the top, William Street on the left, and Oak Street on the right. It's about 4.79 acres. There's 22 properties in that block. Had an appraised value of $2,850,000. Tax revenue is about $32,000. That's $6,680 tax dollars, tax revenue per acre. Remember, Parker Hill Road, $92 per acre. And we're talking about $6,700 of town tax revenue there. Village tax revenue is about $3,675 per acre. We had 1,600 linear feet of sidewalk around this block, and I'm just counting the side of the street that that block is on. I didn't count the other sides. And then if we look at the block just to the west of that, where you have Atkinson, Myrtle, Williams Extension, and Oak, about the same size, a little bit bigger, 5.5 acres. It has 38 properties versus 22. So it's a higher density, building density than the block above. And the tax revenue is 32% higher in a tax revenue per acre for this bottom lot, which is more dense than the block that's just across the street from it. So just to make the point again about density, we go back to that Parker Hill. And now the Parker Hill example, you would have to, this is 220 times the revenue for a dense in-town block than what Parker Hill is. So next slide, please. Next slide. All right, Saxon River. So Saxon River does not have, remember, the village has infrastructure. We have water and sewer in place. We don't have that up on Parker Hill. Saxon River does have town sewer, does not have town water. So the density is, there's not as much density in Saxon River. I took these two blocks, which are Academy Ave, Pleasant Street, Main Street on the left, and Burke Hill Road on the top there. And then in the bottom, we've got Main Street along the bottom, and then the secondary elementary schools here at the top. So that whole block with Burke Hill, Academy Ave, and Grove Street. So about the same size, actually, a couple, the Academy Ave and Pleasant Street is 6.41. Sorry, that's another typo there. So this bottom block has a little bit more space. There are more properties, so a little bit higher density. The appraised value is 3.3 million compared to 2.5. But you see that your tax revenue per acre is pretty stable, pretty similar. There aren't many sections of Saxon River. It's not that big, so there aren't that many sections that would offer a bigger diversity, a greater diversity, or less diversity or density than what we saw in the Bellows Falls villages. And I also again pointed out lineal feet of sidewalks and paved streets. So if we went back, you don't need to go back a slide, but you'll see that the block in Bellows Falls, those two blocks that we looked at, you know, a couple thousand feet of sidewalks or pavement. Parker Hill doesn't have sidewalks, but they got 3 miles of pavement that we pay to take care of. Again, that's a lot more than the 2,500 lineal feet of paved streets here. Next slide, please. Take a quick look at the Saxon River value per acre and tax revenue per acre. Just for reference sake, I looked at Vermont Academy as that big block there. So obviously they have a lot of acreage. $47 million value, assessed value. That's $154,000 per acre. 3 Academy Ave has had an assessed value of 62,000, a value per acre of 2 million. That is the tallest spike in Saxon River. Does anybody know what building that is? That is that small, used to be a counselor's office behind the Saxon River Village Market. It's been turned into residential. It has the highest value per acre of in this town and probably in Bellows Falls. I haven't looked at that either, but that just shows the impact of a small house for one person. We don't need big houses. And we get more tax revenue on that little plot of land. So in the previous slide, you saw a couple of stars there on the bottom of the Saxon River, that block there. Saxon River is not immune to empty lots. So there is an empty lot at 32 Main Street. It has a value of $2,200, a value per acre of $14,000. You get $25 in town taxes a year and $4 in village taxes. The same plot of land, same size land, a few doors down at 26 Main Street, which is where Par 13 that you mentioned tonight, the liquor license, where that building that sits on that land, that building had a value of $111,000. It had almost $800,000 value per acre. It's generating $1,200 in town tax in 2019. So I asked, do we want $1,200 a year in tax revenue, or are we okay with 25 on an empty lot on a main street? We looked at School Street. There's an empty lot that has a value of $29,800. It has a value per acre of almost $100,000. It's getting $335 in town tax, village taxes $58. The house next door to it, $157,000 value. It has over $500,000 in value per acre. It's getting $1,400 more a year in town tax revenue and $250 a year more in village revenue. That's right next to the school, an empty lot next door to the elementary school. It has sidewalks to it for kids to be able to go and play. So again, we're putting value on buildings. Our state government, the tax department is putting priority on the value of the structure, not on the land. And we're seeing examples of where the land is pretty darn valuable, not just from a housing standpoint, but from a tax standpoint. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, the S-100 bill, the Vermont Home Bill, actually hit the governor's desk today, is what I heard. So we're hoping that gets signed into law. It didn't go as far as it needed to go, but it's a step in the right direction, I think. So I highlighted some of the things that are in this bill. Parking, where infrastructure is in place and housing is allowed, no more than one parking space per dwelling is required or can be required. So you can't require more than one. You can certainly require less. Multi-unit housing, where infrastructure is in place and housing is allowed, 4 or fewer units shall be a permitted use. Right now, I think we only have the zoning bylaws only allow duplexes by right. Accessory dwelling units are allowed as a permitted use. 5 or more dwelling units per acre are allowed. That's not very high density. And then the municipal plan, which the Planning Commission has been working 2 years plus on rewriting the town plan for Rockingham, and we hope to get that off to the select board later this summer for review. And then we'll be rewriting the bylaws, and obviously we'll need to meet some of these requirements that the legislature has put into place. I also want to make one comment about the parking. The census data suggests that 14% of our residents don't have vehicles. We're requiring a parking space for them, or maybe even 2 right now. So that's something to think about, that as cost of automobiles increase, as gas prices, there is a significant, not an insignificant amount of the population that can't drive for some reason, whether it's affordability, whether it's because they physically can't, or disability. So we should be allowing housing that doesn't have parking because there are people that need it. Land value tax at the bottom there. I put that in because the House Ways and Means Committee was involved in a presentation back in February, I believe, talking about how complex the Vermont tax code is and how we do all that with the education tax. And it's like, we're only one of 4 states in the country that do it the way that we do it. But land value tax is looking at we should be taxing the value of the land. So the land in our downtowns should be more valuable because it's where all your services are. It's where everything is. You can be without a car. And that's why 14% of the people live in town, because it's the only place they can live when they don't have a vehicle. So we need to be able to provide them housing as well. So it's an interesting, it's about an hour-long presentation to the House Ways and Means Committee, and it looks at it very differently. That may be on the horizon, who knows? That our tax laws will change and how we assess buildings will change. And we probably would want to be on the front end of that. I think that's right, one more slide. So just to finish up here, what should we do? Again, they're not making any more land. So we should protect the rural land that we have, and we should be maximizing the use of our developed areas, particularly when we have the infrastructure in place. That empty lot, the plow truck still goes by it. You're still replacing the sidewalk in front of the empty lot, but they're only paying $25 in taxes, but the neighbor is paying a lot more. You still have your police and fire trucks going by it. You're having all of those expenses, but you're not collecting the right revenue for that infrastructure. And we cannot afford to be putting infrastructure out into the rural lands where there's low density. Again, demographic changes. So smaller households, aging population, the housing stock should match those needs. And then increase and improve housing units. We need more dwellings on existing lots. We should be allowing up to 4 units. So most of the things that are in that in the housing bill, we should be doing, we should be preparing for. And the other data that I would like to share with you, which is in that housing needs assessment, I believe. If not, it was in an earlier presentation. Almost 50% of the lots in Bellows Falls are non-conforming lots. They're smaller than what our zoning board, what our planning commission, what our town plan says is the smallest lot available. So half of our lots are already non-conforming. So if we're losing a building, we need to make it easy for us to redevelop that land. That's about it. Explore incentives for improving, updating rental housing, improve education about real estate investment. So I think our young generation that are coming through, we should be teaching them about the potentials in this town, about becoming a homeowner of a duplex or a 3-unit apartment or a 4-unit apartment, that is a way for them to get started in life. The days of getting out of college and buying a home right out of, not very many people are able to do that anymore. Not very many people in their 40s or 50s or 60s and beyond can afford to do that anymore. But this is one way that we can encourage the younger generation, buy some properties in town, fix them up, get the skills. Any questions? Thank you for sitting through it. Yes.
What was going back to one of the first slides?
Yes.
What's what was it, commercial?
Yep.
Commercial apartment building,
Commercial apartment would be more than 4 units.
more than 4 units?
Yeah, so a 6-unit building had that value of 191,000 and it was 1 million per acre.
Yeah.
So again, that's an example of a more units in a really small lot.
Yeah.
And if we try to get, if density regulations forced us to put 6 units on a lot that was 4 times the size of that, we would not be getting as much revenue per acre.
Right.
Question, Joe.
Yeah.
So great job.
Thank you.
Amazing. The parking requirement, what does that, I mean, roughly, what does that add to the cost of creating a unit of housing in Bellows Falls?
I've seen estimates, I think of like between 20 and 30,000 to build a parking lot. I think the bigger challenge is that if we look at some of these lots in town that are 50 feet wide and 65 feet deep, if you just look at the setbacks that the zoning requires, you might have a building footprint of 35 by 30, which most of us would say, that sounds reasonable. That's 900 square feet on the bottom floor. Oh, I'm gonna be required to have a parking space in there. That's a 10-foot wide parking space. Now my house just got 10 or 12 or 14 feet narrower. And so when it's the parking that would have made that lot less desirable to build on.
So we value cars over people in one sense?
Absolutely, very much so. And I haven't yet done this, but I'm tempted. I've done it informally, driving from one end of Rockingham Street to the other. And I counted 80 empty parking spaces on that street at 4 in the afternoon, so during the workday. It would be interesting to do an inventory while they're doing the sidewalk inventory. Let's just do a parking space inventory. Yeah, that's another task, but a parking inventory would be great to have, and look at how many vehicles do we have, how many visitors. I don't think we have a parking problem unless you really need to park in front of every place that you go to. It's a nice town to walk through. Yes, Amy,
So
sorry.
we're seeing this go to zoning next?
The town plan is going to be handed over to the select board. And then once the town plan is approved, then the planning commission will then need to go through the bylaws and have the bylaws changed to support the town plan.
So the town plan already reflects some of the thinking that you presented?
Yes.
tonight? Great, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, Bonnie.
I know people are sick of hearing me say this, but something that I don't see mentioned here at all is condominiums.
Yep.
You talk about people starting out, well, somebody starting out probably can't afford a 6-unit building. They can't afford to turn a building into 6 units. But condominiums would be extremely helpful for people starting out, and for people older who don't want to be a renter, they want the stability of owning their home, downsize.
Yep, I
And I just see that nowhere mentioned in any of these
No,
housing.
it is, I guess we haven't gotten into the finer details of exactly what those housing centers, whether they should just be long-term apartments, whether they should be short-term rentals, whether they should be condominiums. That's a good discussion to have. My hope is that we can start thinking outside the box. On VPR or NPR, a couple of days ago, they were talking about a organization called Landed. And it is investors, that people that don't have the down payment, very few people can have 20% down payment, but there are investors that are putting the money for the down payment. And then the homeowner is giving, when they sell the house or refinance, the equity, a portion of the equity goes back to that investor. So there's an interesting way to handle it. If people can't afford 20% down payment, there's an out of the box thinking. I think that there are so low interest loans, could someone, they might have 10,000, but they don't have 20,000. And then so the $10,000, is there a 1% or 2% loan that just within the community that we're helping to support people in the community? That's the other thing that I would like to see, is that we're investing in programs that are helping local people continue to stay in the community and help bring the community up, particularly with rental housing.
So condos would be covered in
Yes.
that bill. It's just condominiums, just the ownership structure of that property.
Yeah,
Right.
it'd still be considered a however.
Another aspect of that is, I've looked into this, I know in Bellows Falls Village, we have some large multi-unit properties that are assessed lower than the single family home next to it, same age building, same size lot. If you had condominiums, each unit would be assessed and taxed. So be a tremendous help to the grand list, rather than having 4 apartments, 6 apartments, and someone collecting all those rents and only paying.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a hierarchy of things that need to happen. We've got old buildings that are sitting vacant because they're unlivable. So we need to decide what we do with those. Are we gonna fix them and get them back online? Empty lots, we need to be able to make them developable. So, and then we look at, do we condo some, there's probably some legal intricacies of the condo that are different than a rental, and that may or may not.
Jeff and I went
Encourage
through
people
this,
to-
and,
Well, there's the structure and then there's
Right.
fire
yeah.
code requirements.
It doesn't really pencil out, but I see a lot of taxpayer dollars going into making big multi-units that are gonna be owned by an entity that's gonna collect the rent. So I think we really need some assistance from the state and the feds to try and make it possible for someone to create condominiums in some of our older and larger buildings, and give local people a chance to establish some equity in the place they live.
Yes.
I'm a bit confused on your references to parking.
Yes.
Okay, that you have a building, you have tenants have vehicles. And are you proposing that these vehicles, people could have these vehicles, but they can stay out on the street or something, or?
Well,
Because
I think any number of situations can happen. Out of 14 rental units that I have, only 7 of them are occupied by people with vehicles. But I need to have 14 parking spaces. So obviously that's not a constant if there's turnover. But I think that we have, there are parking spaces in town lots, there are parking spaces on streets, all those things can be used. I get that we don't want to deal with snow removal and having cars on the street, but some towns do.
right, but I think what you've seen is that a village like this with the old homes that have been cut up into various apartments and what used to be front lawns are now parking spaces. I mean, it looks horrible, looks terrible. I think, there's a lot of good, what you're saying, a lot of good thinking, et cetera. But the idea of not requiring parking places so that you can create streets that have, you can't find a place, whatever,
Yeah,
it just,
I
it
would
doesn't
argue
make
that,
sense. It has to be balanced, there has to be a balance.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
And right sizing, that, one of the lots you showed there, the open lot, they're building a small house now. Well, that's what they should do. That's how it shouldn't be reproduced, the house that burned down 15 years ago.
But if
But
someone-
they're gonna be able to park their car there too. I mean, it's not gonna be any problem there.
Right, so the,
Disturbing for a minute, but is there anybody running upstairs, the movie theater?
It's closed.
It's closed tonight?
Jen's.
I'll go for this.
the state estimates that we need 35 to 45,000 additional homes by 2030, not too far away. I believe that the desire to not have a car sitting in a front lot on a large building is somewhat of an example of putting the car before the people. We're saying we don't want to have, we need to have places for cars out around the back or whatever, or we need to reduce the number of units in the building so that we can have enough space for cars. Those are examples where we're putting the parking. The issue that we created was, well, I don't want there to be parking in the front of the building. But as a landlord or property owner, maybe if there's 6 units and you only have 4 parking spaces, 2 of those have to be occupied by people without cars. And you just have to tell the residents that there is no parking for these 2 units. But there's a parking pass. If you have a car, you can use a municipal lot. The cost of that's included in your rent or any number of things. I think that, again, what I'm asking for is to think differently, because we are where we are because of the way we've thought in the past. And we need to change our thinking if we're going to create a better housing, better jobs, better homes, all of those things. So, thanks. Yeah.
And I don't know if we've ever done an alternate side of the street parking in winter. I mean, do we have to clear both sides of the street all the time? That would open up a ton of parking spaces.
Again, I think a parking inventory would be pretty valuable to get into that discussion. Maybe there's one that's been done, I don't know. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott,
Yes.
Jamie, before we move on, I just have a question regarding some of the statistics that he had. Is he still there? Oh,
Yep.
he is.
Yes.
Hey, so your second slide, second bullet, where it says 25% lower state and county median property values.
Yes.
And did you go with the listers on those, or did you go with the state formula? Because I know our listers earlier this month just decided not to do a reassessment for 2 years, only because the numbers throughout the state are so skewed right now with overvaluation and the way that they value it.
Yeah, I believe the Vermont Housing Finance Agency used the data, most recent census data. So that probably would have gone to the grand list.
Well, I just think we should review that. And I agree on affordable housing and everything. But you just stated, you have 14 rental properties or whatever, but I believe the tax base right now for the town and village, if you're a landlord, your taxes, it's a different tax rate for a rental property than it is actually for a homeowner. Is that correct?
Not that I know of. I think a rental property pays based on the value of the property, the same $1.12 that everybody else does.
based on
Okay.
fair market value, and people tend not to want to live in multi-unit buildings as a primary residence, so the values are depreciated. And until that shifts, and it may shift with the economic reality that young people starting out will not be looking for the $200,000 single family, they'll be looking for the $200,000 house that has a rental income to help them pay for the mortgage.
And we also, the rental properties also need to, the middle income housing needs to be improved. So not just low income and upper income, but all in between. So the quality of available units needs to be improved as well.
Right, and the bottom line, the way to attract is obviously having business, decent housing, but it's also is affordable tax rate. So when we talk affordable housing, I mean, we have the canal project that with all that, you know, based income rentals there. We just had the Bellows Falls Garage. We've also got the Hetty Green. We've got Windsor Association down here on Pine Street. So it's not a lack of effort from this community to invite those type of investments. I just don't think it's up to the boards to get involved with trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to on-street parking and all that. But do appreciate the information, and it is thinking outside the box.
Thank you.
All right, folks, let's move on to the second item on the agenda, and that is the public safety discussion. We have the sheriff is on Zoom, I believe, and we have Mr. Bemis, Chief of Police Bellows Falls, and Sean McGinnis over there here for some input. So Scott, you wanna jump this off?
Yeah, so I guess this is one of those items that goes around and then seems to come around again. So part of the conversation that started on the rural Rockingham, discussions for police services touched into the contract that Saxtons River has with the sheriff and their services. Town of Westminster was aware, so they've been in contact about services. The sheriff has had some regional discussions because there are regional issues about supporting communities that don't necessarily have the ability to support their own department and trying to figure out what the right mix is. So with all that being said, there is, I guess, some discussion about what is the approach or what would the board entertain to look at in terms of a longer term structure as to how you want to see these services delivered. There are certainly challenges, and the sheriff can tell you and Dave can tell you in recruitment. It's not easy right now to recruit and retain officers. It's not just a southern Vermont problem. It's a state of Vermont problem. We don't have the support that we used to get from other levels of government. The Vermont State Police used to provide a lot more support to local communities and in terms of the types of services that they could come in and sort of supplement. And right now they're stretched thin and actually are probably not in a position, they've told us in many instances, where they're not going to be available to respond to high profile and, events that you would normally expect them to be involved in. So the issues are plentiful. The challenges are, there are ways to create regional policing. It requires legislation, it requires the cooperation of multiple jurisdictions, and it does require some cooperation amongst communities if that's the approach people wanted to take. So none of that's easy. It's all somewhat challenging, but again, the discussion is at a board level, what is your interest or what would you entertain if this issue is not going to go away, it's something we're going to have to address. So that's sort of a little background, and I did provide some material, just general material, to give you some just sort of entry level background into this problem. So that sort of brings us to where we are here at the table today.
All right, let's open this up for discussion. Anybody have any suggestions or questions? People are here to answer some of them. Do you have some? I know the Westminster board is here, or some from the Westminster board. So So, does anyone on the board have any idea of where we want to go with this? I know we talked about regional, et cetera, as Scott just mentioned. I don't know, go ahead.
The cooperation between Westminster and Rockingham has been discussed at board meetings. I'm wondering what the challenges are to doing that. Are there statutory challenges? Are there, besides the financial challenges, what would stop us from jointly working on law enforcement? That's sort of Westminster.
Well, there's jurisdictional concern, right? Because anytime that you're police officers, how much activity they're going to be required to undertake in any community, what level of policing are people interested in paying for? And then ultimately, how do you provide that level of service? Because there's also support services that underlie all of that. So we don't have our own dedicated dispatch. We rely on the sheriff who provides us dispatch, when we don't have a staff dispatch center, which is a significant amount of time. The sheriffs and the state's looking at regional dispatching, but we don't know what that's gonna look like. We don't know how that's gonna be funded, and we're not really sure at this point how that would impact us as we decide how we would wanna try to provide those services. Simple things like the number of cars, just the basic ideas of training, because again, every department has different, I mean, there's certain standards that are required, but because everything, it's not just one person and you can say, okay, we'll add one or two extra people and we can cover all these additional shifts. It's really more significant than that, because with scheduling and with all the other issues that go with that, you've got to incorporate all those concerns into some sort of approach, and then you got to fund it. And ultimately, that's the biggest challenge, because the only way right now, and you read some of the very preliminary material from Jim Mullen, is are limited ways that you can go about funding this type of jurisdiction outside of your own taxing jurisdiction. So you have to create some sort of entity that would basically fund those types of services.
So seeing the Westminster board here, Matt, before you get in, are you looking for any specific?
No, I don't think anything specific. We've contracted with the sheriff's department for as long as I can remember, for a good long time. Our contract is up in June, end of June. We've talked with Mark Anderson. We've looked at a constable, hiring a constable with law enforcement capabilities. We're looking at maybe our own officer would be a better way to go. But again, we go back to, we don't have a dispatch, we have all these other services that we would need from somebody that we would have to pay for. We're still in this this limbo stage. I don't see us going away from the sheriff department totally, but I think we'd like, only speaking for myself, I think we'd like to have some more control over where the person patrols, when we get complaints coming in, where we could send that person to. We've talked with VLCT's law enforcement guy. I don't know how else to describe him, but he gave us a lot of really good information, cost-wise, insurance. I was told 3 years ago that our insurance, we could never afford to insure our own officer. So we left it as be. He told us our insurance would cost around $2,000 more to have that. I pay more than that for my pickup. So I personally think it's feasible after you get past the large chunk up front, but we're kind of in this limbo stage. So no, I'm not looking for anything specific. It's just how can we work together? Maybe we can't work together to make something work, service-wise, or contract with maybe both, maybe between Bellows Falls and the sheriff's department, to get our needs covered. The majority of our needs, I believe, and Mark might be able to tell different, is traffic complaints, speeding. That's our biggest complaints that we have to deal with. Not to say we don't have other issues too, but.
Yeah.
Well, Bellows Falls has a department, Saxons River is contracted with the sheriff's department The outlying areas of Rockingham, I guess, have been wanting and calling for policing. So I'm concerned with talking with Westminster, with all due respect.
I totally understand.
Because it just seems like a giant of a situation for policing. As far as cost. So are we talking about policing all of Rockingham or partnering with Westminster when it comes to this?
There's nothing has been.
I mean, that's what we're here for. I know that I can say, looking at the Bellows Falls Village report, the police department right now is $1.6 million.
Right. So if you police.
What?
Our total budget is 1.6.
Yeah, the police, yeah.
No, our total budget.
budget, 1.6.
The police is amazing.
All right.
So if you round it at $1 million just for Bellows Falls, and then you pick up Saxtons River and you pick up all of Rockingham, where does that go?
Well, I think it would,
And then you pick
honestly,
up,
would
then you pick
depend
up
on
Westminster.
the scope of the operation. I mean, the type of coverage that we have in the village. If you wanted to duplicate that in rural Rockingham, of course, it goes up. Yeah, so I mean, I think the challenge would be really is, does Rockingham want to have police coverage? Separate and apart from Westminster. I mean, I've been on the board long enough. We actually had a proposal under a previous manager from Westminster. They wanted us to bid on the contract for the, to kind of compete against the sheriff. And it was a non-starter. I mean, it just didn't work at all. I think the sheriff operation is set up to do contractual relationships. The village police department is not set up that way. And so to ask our police chief to come up with a contract for Westminster it was just, so I think that, I personally think that if Saxtons River and rural Rockingham are hiring the sheriff, and if the changes in residences and population in rural Rockingham and Saxtons River are such that police services are becoming more in demand, then I think Rockingham, the town of Rockingham, together with Saxtons River Village and Bellows Falls Village, ought to be discussing what it is we want to do and see if we can accomplish that as a town. And that's where I would like to see this go, if it goes anywhere. But if to bring Westminster into the picture at this time, given all of our staffing issues and other things, it's just a non-starter. But I do think if the town of Rockingham wants to have a broader discussion, I think we should encourage that and see where it goes.
So, Sid, are you essentially proposing that town of Rockingham take over the Bellows Falls Police Force and make it Rockingham Police Force? Is that where this leads?
Well, I would think if it became the Rockingham Police Department, it would be under the select board of Rockingham, yeah.
Right.
It would be.
So are we nibbling our way towards merger with that one? Are people gonna scream about that?
Yeah, I don't think we're talking.
So first thing would be,
I knew that would pick up my conversation. Okay.
don't say the M word.
No merger, just the Rockingham
Right,
Police Department. I think that's a great idea.
So who would come up with some sort of guesstimate as to what that would cost? And you have to have a lot of manpower to cover all of Rockingham.
Yeah.
And so where does that come from?
You have to have a study done. You have to. Because it would require a lot of detail and coverage. That's the key.
Clearly, that's the key to it, is
Yeah.
cost.
I mean, my sense of talking to rural residents is they want traffic control. That's what they want. They do not want full-time Bells Falls type level policing. They want the occasional traffic so that people who are the habitual speeders know there's a chance you're gonna have a cop and you're gonna get stopped. They are, yes, there's frustration when things happen, like a neighbor had her generator stolen last night in Gardensville. She called the state police, but there's no camera there. What is the state police going to do? What's the rural Rockingham, if there's such a police going to do? Honestly, if you don't have a camera. So some of those issues sadly get unaddressed because you can't solve a lot of these crimes, these thefts. Drug dealing, that's another issue, but you can't just sit where all the deals are happening and wait for one to happen in front of you, because it's gonna move somewhere else. So I think what has to be done is to get maybe a survey somehow of the residents of Rockingham, say, what do you want? What does rural Rockingham want? Are Bellows Falls residents happy with the police services you have now? Is going more with the Wyndham County, a larger contract? We don't know because they haven't started in rural Rockingham yet. Is Saxtons River happy with the contract you have now and the residents? So I think starting with getting that data and input from the residents is important. Is there, Gary, are you aware of, or can you look for any funding sources that could do a sort of a study on this, an assessment for us?
We can certainly look and apply, I think. Certainly, it seems it's not a priority for the feasibility study grants where we've had a request in for close to 2 years for the fire departments.
Yeah, and then Amy next.
Yeah, I love the idea of a survey, Susan, but in the survey, let's say it will cost you this much. What do you want? What will it cost? Because if it costs $1 million for the Bellows Falls Police Department to cover, what, 1 square mile? Imagine what the tax bill would look like for rural Rockingham. And we have so many fewer, so much less density, so many fewer residents.
Well, the issue is gonna be manpower, first of all. I mean, we don't even have the manpower here in Bellows Falls, right? So when you're looking at Rockingham and Bellows Falls and cars and vehicles, so I would say at least double, would be my just off the cuff guess. Double or triple, maybe.
Amy.
So as a Rockingham resident who lives in Saxtons River, I think it's too early to have this discussion. We voted for coverage in Bartonsville. I'm looking forward to hearing at the next town meeting what the results of that coverage have been, whether there's disappointment or enthusiasm, and perhaps based on that, looking for what the next step is. I'm also echoing what was going around the table, waiting for the results of the fire feasibility study. And I'm not eager to entertain more cooperative efforts at this point in time. I'd like to see the fire department scenario play out before we enter the next discussion about policing.
Yeah, and just to remind people, it's not just Burnsville policing that we voted on, it's rural Rockingham.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know that's what you meant, but some people might.
No, you're absolutely right, you're correct. I'll do better, I promise. Roll Rockingham.
Cambridge Port too.
Yes.
I know that the sheriff's on, and maybe before, maybe Mark might want to say some things. Just speed enforcement is a different level of policing than patrol. It's a whole different, it's quite frankly, it's a different aspect. It's not truly policing, it's just speed enforcement. And that is, there are, ways to do dedicated patrols that do nothing but enforce speeding and other offenses like that. But I don't know, again, if there's a capacity, maybe Mark could answer this, if there's a capacity to dedicate a car or 2 cars and 2 officers where you have dedicated enforcement, and that's a contracted service as opposed to patrol, which is a different type of enforcement. Obviously, visibility matters. It does help somewhat. But if you really want targeted speed enforcement, that's a different approach. So.
The sheriff is up. Mark, do you have any remarks you'd like to pop out here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of all the boards. Thank you for your time, and I will extend my graciousness for the Zoom invitation. I'm away at training right now. It's the annual Chiefs and Sheriffs Conference. So I apologize I'm not able to be there in person. I want to respond to several questions that have been raised by board members. I apologize. I can't see your names on the Zoom screen. So I'm just going to try to raise it by the questions. I think one question was, if the Bellows Falls Police Department costs $1 million, what would it cost for Saxtons River and or rural Rockingham? Well, you can add $14,000 on. That's the cost of my contract, which would be for rural Rockingham and Saxtons River combined. If we talk about the merger of the Rockingham villages and or any other entities within the town of Rockingham, you'd probably be running into more complex issues. I guess I just want to say this simply. What's being discussed by these boards tonight, this is not a new conversation to Vermont. In fact, it's been studied since 1969 at least, about the consolidation and operationalization of law enforcement services throughout the state of Vermont. So I'm coming here with an idea, not here to pitch my idea tonight, but rather to say we've identified, my office has identified a problem statement for rural Vermont and specifically rural Windham County, that there is insufficient and non-uniform policing that already exists. Has its own issues, and we're looking to tackle that. Whether that's my office tackling that, whether that is another agency who is the most sensical solution, is what we're going to be looking into. And the town of Rockingham and certainly the villages, if they want to be a part of that conversation, are certainly welcome to participate in that. That invitation is going out. We're beginning the work over the summer now that town meetings are over, budgets are over, and people are starting to get a breath after the legislative session. I'm not here to talk about that other than to acknowledge the big elephant in the room, which is this is not a new nut to crack. Rockingham has a unique problem or opportunity in that the villages are, I think, the only community in Windham County that are as strong as they are in providing governmental services. And so to that end, we're looking at how to provide services as they're being requested and what resources are regionally available, whether that's the Bellows Falls Police Department, my department, or another agency that made sense. Right now, my agency does make sense in terms of Saxtons River and rural Rockingham. I've talked to Chief Bemis about how do we work together and how do we utilize resources fairly. One thing I can say right now, my staffing, my full-time staff is full. My seasonal staff is full. I have about 5 different entities asking for full-time positions, which I have not yet resourced. And so that's where I would say we're short. So as we look at new opportunities, and certainly I consider rural Rockingham within what we have the ability to resource, because we've been discussing that for quite some time now. As we look at new opportunities or shifts in how policing initiatives work, we're also looking at what people need right now, and we're going to be committing resources to that. With regards to if the village police department provided services in these other communities, I'm not here to say I want to give up contracts. Really much appreciate my relationships that we currently have. But as part of a long-term planning discussion, if it makes sense to pivot these resources elsewhere, we're certainly happy to be partners in it. We just ask that we're able to plan as opposed to a May 30th decision of, hey, let's upset the apple cart, and then we learn about some of the issues that come about. That said, I also think that we really need to, as a state, we need to address the opportunities around rural policing. Some of you probably remember him, former Attorney General Amstoy. I spoke with him about this, and he wished me luck because he said he tried to work on this and it failed back when he was working on it. So I don't come into this with total optimism. It is certainly cautioned by very many people with efforts, but this is not a problem that's changed in the last 70 years. we have the resources, we have the energy to try and tackle it. We want to be a service provider to Windham County. And so that's why we're working on that. I have great respect for the Bellows Falls Police Department. We have a great relationship with them. And how we move forward, I think that's part of the broad discussion. But I also think right now, the short-term solutions are you're getting into really complicated businesses around all the infrastructure things. And I'd be happy to be able to explain any of those things from dispatching and infrastructure down to the politics of it. But at the end of the day, I also want to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Dave, do you want to throw in a few cents or?
Well, I don't really have a lot to add to that, but to say that if we did go into the town of Rockingham, it wouldn't have to be a doubling or tripling of our budget. It would be a political issue as to what kind of services you may want in Rockingham. If you don't need coverage all the time, it would be a decision of the select board of what they wanted and the trustees in Saxon River. It's not just saying, oh, it'll be a tripling of what it is for the village of Bellows Falls. It depends on what the services wanted. So I could say yes.
Would you definitely need another car?
We would probably need another vehicle and probably need additional personnel. But that, like I say, it would all depend on what the select board wanted for services. We're not saying we're going to be need to be in every part of the town 24 hours a day. It depends on the amount of services you would want. And we would try to accommodate whatever that was.
Right.
James, at the meeting that we had, in the town meeting discussion of this, you mentioned that as a Bellows Falls taxpayer, you weren't keen on paying twice. Right, paying for.
Yeah, I think the select board, when they desire to extend police services, and they don't want to do it through the Bellows Falls Police Department, I think you just need to find a way to charge the residents of rural Rockingham for the service. I think it's only fair. I mean, we don't ask you to participate in our bill. I think you do get indirectly some services from our police department, but we're not looking to charge you for it. But we don't want our people, our residents here, to have to share the bill for policing rural Rockingham. Saxon River deals with their contract with their citizenry. And so I think that's the equitable issue that I had brought up. So, but you know, the solution that you want to take, I mean, is I think there was some surprise at our meeting when there was absolutely no contact with the trustees of the police department when you were coming up with your proposal to provide service. I thought that was, or some people thought that was in poor taste. But, you know, we are sort of one. Right. And so I think, but the bigger issue is, you know, let's try to solve whatever the problem is in the most, the best way financially and otherwise,
So some sort of special tax district would have to be developed if rural Rockingham decided to go it alone or have our own, right? Or if we partnered with Saxtons River, there'd have to be a taxing entity that would be distinct from the village. Right?
That to me would be fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, just the opposite is that if, for instance, we decided to go townwide police and rural Rockingham and Saxon River residents took up, you know, whatever it is, whether it's $1 million, $1.5 million, then you're gonna have people very much concerned that they're only spending their time in Bellows Falls. So you really have to make sure that they get out to the rural areas and not focus only on the village. And that's one of the big concerns that people have in rural Rockingham.
Going forward, I'm planning to keep the materials that were created for this meeting. I found two things of special interest, the costs for sheriff contracts in the area, that nice chart that shows
Yeah.
specifically what is spent in Dummerston, in Westminster, that's terrific. And I also really appreciate the research that Jim Mullen did, telling us if we, what we have available to us under current statute in terms of going forward legitimately. So both of those are really helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, anyone else want to chip in while we got the open floor here? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to,
Thank you, Mark.
Blair. Amy, you still up there? You had your hand up earlier. Do you wanna throw a few cents in the hat? Guess not. All right, let's move on to the reviewing the adopt the LEMP.
Peter? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering with Westminster represented here, whether it would be possible to ask for plans around the bridge over the Saxtons River on 121. I know that's a ways out, but it seems like an incredible opportunity to hear where we are on those plans. It's not on the agenda, but we have somebody from Westminster here.
I can wait till other business if you'd rather. I don't have a whole lot more to tell you other than the dates that we have been told. It's up to you.
You can throw your 2 cents in if they want to hear from you, or we can, you can make a couple statements and we'll move on.
Yeah, last I knew, it was still in the engineering phase right now. They've been doing some type of test boring on that bridge in the last couple of weeks. I believe it's gonna go out to bid in 24. Last I knew, for construction in 25. I believe it's still planned as a summer, construction season, so whatever that start and finish is, I don't know that, but will be a full closure for that one.
I think some of the concern, Jason, is the detour. I don't know, we've all experienced it.
For sure.
Some of
I
us.
live 2 seconds from that bridge and it's a pain in the butt. Yeah.
So, I think that's the area of concern, and I know that in some of the plans, a temporary bridge was, mentioned. But that was mixed by Westminster because of cost, and I think there's.
In the very beginning, the temporary.
States back, in
In the very beginning, the temporary was talked about. It changes our local match from 2.5%, and don't quote me on these numbers, to well over 5%. It also changes the entire scope of the project because right now there's no right of way and easements to deal with. You're only replacing what's there. If you put a temporary next to it, now you have property owners to deal with, you have easements to deal with, you have all that to deal with. So on top of the additional cost, which is why, and originally it was talked about there was a much shorter construction window. And we didn't need that expense for that window. Now that window is substantially larger, but it's definitely an inconvenience. It's an inconvenience for everybody, but it's not permanent. It'll pass. You just get used to going that way and it adds 20 minutes to get to town, but that's all I can offer. And I'm only one person on that board.
I understand, so, yeah, you want to put you on the spot. But.
No, that's all I know. I have not seen anything else other than that.
Okay, so, I guess you watch your emails. All right. We hit that one, so let's move right, now let's try to move on to the LEMP, local emergency management plan. Everybody had in their packet, anyone want to make any comments? I know I've got a couple of misprints in there, phone numbers,
yeah.
and they have since been corrected, I've been told, so we'll open it up. Anybody wants to ask any questions of what this is all about? Anybody understand what we're trying to accomplish with this?
I didn't get a package.
Probably supposed to be.
I'm sure it's okay. And I didn't get noticed.
Look at it, on my notes of the structure on top, I mean. All right, Scott, you wanna give a.
Yeah, so basically, this is just what the state requires of us, and it runs through the regional planning commissions, and it just provides a lot of just sort of baseline details. So if there's a regional emergency, they want to know, do you have a shelter? Who's your basic contacts? What's your basic sort of levels of capacity, so they can at least start to look at if there is a larger area-wide type of event. It's not as comprehensive as the hazard mitigation plan, which is a separate document, which has a whole host of other items and requirements in it. It's really more for our state planners and people that look at, the regional response types of activities. Since the last time you guys looked at this, we did add, Sue Hammond was able to confirm that we could provide sheltering services at the Bartonsville Grange. So that was a addition to this current update, as well as we're still looking at options for Code Red or these other types of large, basically these firms that will provide outreach during emergency events. So like the state has their emergency dispatching program, it will give people warnings, alerts, updates. The problems that we're running into with all these programs is they're opt-in programs. So quite frankly, they're only as good as the people that will sign up and be available to get updates, whether it's power outages, trees down in certain communities, whatever the problem might be, depends on the event. So they're not free. A lot of them have upfront costs, and then you have to pay to maintain the systems. And as I said, they're only as good as the penetration as people who are, they're an opt-in type of program. So people have to provide cell phones or other means to be contacted in order to get the updated information. So that's not in this plan. We're still evaluating options and resources, so we don't have a proposal yet to go back to the board to try to standardize on one of these providers, which would be, a new enhancement. So it's pretty much the same plan you've seen, just with the addition of the Bartonsville options for shelter.
Okay, any questions?
Some contact information.
Discussion?
Right. Thank you, so I'll take that.
Hearing none, let's walk on to the next item, which is the sidewalk improvement 5-year funding proposal. There's a short missile in your packet about that, and let's start the lead on that one.
So again, we briefly touched on this earlier tonight. We do have sort of a basic inventory that was done with sidewalk condition, working. They do have to adopt it, the LEMP, you just have to adopt it in order for it to go forward to that state. You get to sign for a.
Do you want a motion?
That would be helpful.
I move that we adopt the LEMP this evening, and have Chair, who's
Peter will have to sign for it.
Who?
Peter.
Authorize me to sign it.
Yeah, authorize Peter to sign it.
Chair Peter Bellows to sign.
We'll hear a second. Second. Motion made and seconded to adopt the local emergency management plan as presented, and have the chair of the select board, myself, sign said document. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, now I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so sidewalk. So walk bike committee's been working with Wyndham Regional, and there is a more comprehensive program that's available to us that would take our baseline information, update that information, also including some of the Saxtons River information, so that we would have a more comprehensive idea of where our sidewalk deficiencies are, where we might have gaps in our sidewalk network, and then we could then start to prioritize, as we had talked earlier, about what funding might be necessary in order to try to catch up, because as we all are aware, sidewalks are one of our primary deferred maintenance problems. They just typically when times get tough, those are one of the areas that people tend to cut back on, and then catching up takes time and effort and money. And so I think the idea would be if we go forward with this, we'll have a better understanding of what that level of investment might be, and then we can start talking about it in budget in terms of how we might want to try to catch up to some of those gaps.
One tweak I would suggest in light of John's presentation is that we inventory parking spaces at the same time. They will, we can talk to Wyndham Regional if they will accept that as expansion of the.
I'm sure we can work with them on that, if they're gonna be out doing field work.
Yeah, we can kind of do it.
Yeah, see if we can.
Bam.
So just a minor detail, you said some of Saxon's rivers sidewalks, is it some or all of it?
Well, it would be the sidewalks that are currently in Saxon's River. They might make recommendations for additional. I don't know until they go out there and take a look at the inventory. And we walked it, we have a baseline of what we walked if we knew you were handy that time, so. But I think there might be other places that they might think, as we talked about, need
Yeah.
additional connection, and that's not in the inventory currently,
Okay.
so.
Thank you.
And would they also be looking at sidewalks that maybe could be removed in some of these areas where we don't need it on both sides of the street?
The board could always look into that, absolutely. It's a policy, so if that's something, I mean, we only plow one side of the sidewalk in the winter. So, wouldn't that be that far fetched?
So I guess that's the question is, would this be looking more at the current conditions? How deeply would it delve into recommendations or changes?
I think the biggest recommendation is gonna be with our gaps. That's gonna be where there's gonna be recommendation. Otherwise, I think they're gonna take your existing inventory and give you sort of a condition report in some sense of what needs to be spent in order to bring that up to, you know, reasonable condition. I don't think we want to. We would be realistic about what we can afford, so.
Hey, anyone else have any questions? Sidewalk. Seeing none, let's move on to approve the opioid settlement funds for.
Before we jump on, I think Jamie had a question.
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more thing on sidewalks. What's the, I understand deferred, maintenance, and it's the easiest one to defer. But what is our liability with having unsafe sidewalks? Just from a town standpoint. I mean, understanding it was deferred, we're looking at catching up everything. But if they are unsafe or unstable sidewalk, bad condition, what is our town liability if somebody gets hurt on those?
I think anything that the town owns in the right of way has liability, Jamie.
Okay.
So it's just like have a pothole in the street. It's no different than when a tree root raises up a sidewalk 2 inches. It's all liability. So
Okay.
it's all, yes.
All right, I'm just wondering if we're looking at priorities, I mean, just condition, but liability as well, but thank you.
Mhm.
All right, let's start with the approve the opioid settlement fund for disbursements.
So both the town and the village have opioid settlement funds that we have applied for, but what we need to do now is create an expense fund so that when we're paying various organizations that have come and presented and the boards have made choices about how they want to spend the money, we can disperse the funds. So right now, you don't have one in the chart of accounts. We just have the revenue account where we receive the money. We just need to create an expense account, one for the town and one for the village, so that we can have an expense line and then it can be part of our audit as we go forward.
So you want a motion to approve?
I gotta listen, you might need something more. What else do you need?
Go ahead.
What we actually need is permission to create a different fund, to remove it from the general fund. Because if we don't spend it by the end of the year, it's just gonna get swallowed up in the general fund and there won't be any more money for the opioid.
You want it as reserve fund? Just as a
Yes.
reserve fund? Okay.
Yes,
So the motion you're gonna want is to establish a reserve fund for opioid settlement, correct?
correct.
one for the town and one for the village.
All right, so for the town, someone want to make the motion, the second one I just popped out there?
So moved.
Didn't take very long to do that.
Okay.
Any further discussion, questions? Okay, motion made, do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, motion made and seconded to approve, or to establish an opioid settlement fund for disbursement. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries for the town.
I'd like to entertain a motion for the village.
I'll make that motion, Paul.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so a motion has been made and seconded that we would set up a reserve fund for expenditures of the opioid settlement funds. It's been seconded. All those, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. So we've established.
Thank you.
Just one question though, this is just the first set of funding, there's more in the works?
There's multiple years and multiple sources, so, right. So each time they hit a different level, so they've done the manufacturers, they've done some of the distributors, now I think they're going down to the retail, like the drugstores and some of those folks. And then they're coming back for multiple years as well, so the amounts are changing year by year.
Hey, let's go to the proposed revision to the tax sale policy. There's a policy in your packet. Basic of it is we've brought back from a 2-year tax sale requirement to a 1-year, and the amount of taxes due or outstanding has been reduced. It used to be 2,000, now it's down to 1,000. So
this would trigger, obviously, more properties that would be delinquent. So as the board has said, they would like to see more frequent activities so that the tax sales don't build up like they had over the last time that we had that gap. So this policy will help us maintain a more consistent pattern of doing the tax sales, and then we'll see if in fact it's successful. I think we were fairly happy with the results of the last time, so we're hopeful that this will continue that progress, and we'll see more people keeping current with their taxes.
Right.
I support this new policy. Scott, we got near $500,000 in overdue taxes and penalties about 1.5 years ago, and that's just unacceptable. So I really appreciate your work in changing the policy and conducting the tax sale so successfully. And most of our neighboring towns do it every year. I can tell by the ads you see in the paper, so I think it would be a good move for Rockingham to follow that.
So before we,
Sorry. I moved.
before we make that, I'd like to hear from Saxon River Village, because they are very staunchly opposed to tax sales out there. They rather just put liens on it, what the village is expressed at their village meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So what, if this was adopted, they would, so even in the old policy, they would still fall off. There's a property in Saxon River that was outstanding in taxes and were qualified for a tax sale, they would go on the list, correct?
If we did the taxes, then they would be on our tax sale list. Yes.
Okay.
Well, there's a difference between Rockingham taxes and Saxon River village.
Yeah.
So when they owe village taxes, we're putting a lien on them. What Rockingham does, we don't have any control
Right.
over.
Just vice versa.
You know, you set a policy, we can't do anything about it.
So Peter,
Yeah.
I haven't heard any discussion that would indicate that we've changed our policies for Saxon's River liens. But just as Matt said, if it's a town of Rockingham that triggers the tax sale, I think we go along with that. Yours is typically the burden of taxes owed anyway.
Okay, well, I just want to get, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate the question.
Hanging out there.
Yeah.
Well, making any comments that you need to make. All right, you wanna make the motion now, sir?
Yes, I move that we accept the municipal delinquent tax policy as provided by the town manager in our packets.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made
Does
and
this
seconded.
apply to both the village and?
You would have to take your own.
Okay.
The only we have
And your
is
own
for the
policy.
town.
Once we do the town, the village, I'll normally do a second one. We'll do a second. Right.
All right, do we hear a second? Sue second. All right. Motion made and seconded to adopt the new town of Rockingham municipal delinquent tax policy. Any further discussion, questions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. I got front of me, so.
Okay.
All right, one last circulation.
We'll make it some.
We'll do an update. We can do it as a
At their own
separate
meeting.
At our own
We
meeting.
usually follow
So
suit.
we follow suit.
Is Saxon River comfortable doing it in another time, if we want to reflect on this as well?
I'm not sure, do we need to take any action?
Down in Rockingham,
It's kind of rough.
yeah, so if we decide we
Well, I
want
don't
to, we can.
Bellows Falls adopts the Rockingham policy, is that what you do? Or we would adopt it? We would.
Bellows Falls.
We would just go along with their tax sale because any of,
But their tax sale is Rockingham tax, it's not Village Bellows Falls.
but it would include any property in Bellows Falls.
Town, that's right.
Right.
Same way ours.
That's why I understand it.
We go along with that.
Question, if the town tax, sorry. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
But if the town tax is delinquent and the village, and the Saxons River village tax is delinquent, and we're not included in the policy, and there's a tax sale, our lien is not collected. Is that how,
We would not collect your lien at a tax sale.
regardless of what happens?
That's not my understanding.
So perhaps we need to discuss this. Good point, Kristen.
It causes confusion, but it just is, or if thinking would be that if you're in the town, your property is delinquent, it comes up for town tax sale, whatever falls through. I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense if it goes to tax sale, somebody buys it, and then you guys get shorted, or, I don't know.
Right, no, I.
We'd have to look at it, I don't know if there's a
Understanding
legal thing, we'd have to check
that.
on.
So if there's a lien on the property and it gets sold, doesn't the lien have to be satisfied?
Not,
If it hasn't been warned and if it hasn't been properly noticed, no.
I was just gonna say that, yes, if you had the policy in play, if the cleanest way would be for Secretary to just adopt the same type of policy that Bellows Falls has. And then there's no questions asked, it's just part of the mix.
All right, very good,
I'll put it on the agenda.
thank you.
Okay, we all set with that one? All right, let's go to the additional review of the personnel policy updates. They're in your handbook, and I hope you all read them.
So, yeah, this is a work in progress. I don't want any particular action tonight. It's more for your information. We had a personnel committee meeting, so we're starting to work through this. A lot of the language changes, and Heather's been trying to make things up to date, because there's been state statutory changes as well as programmatic changes that need to be reflected in our policies that we were out of date with. So she's been working on that. We will have another session, a review through the summer with the folks at VLCT and then our attorney, and then we'll be back to everybody to have another meeting with our personnel committee and then back to the boards probably in September for action. So just wanted to get this in people's hands. There's a lot of material there. It takes some time to go through. So just an opportunity to look at it, and it will be coming back to you later on in the fall.
So,
Yeah, there's still a few pronouns that need to be changed. I'm sure you'll pitch that in your next run through.
I know Heather's been working on those, so trying to update that as well.
And now that cannabis is legal, does the drug testing process, does that
Is that now part of what
The Fed set that policy because of CEO requirements.
okay, so we have to follow the federal policy, not the state.
We're in a federally mandated database for our drivers, so until the feds change it, we have to follow these procedures. Even though it's illegal, I know
And
it's.
other employees, is it not just drivers, but all employees, same deal?
Well, it's different if you have a CDL because there's random testing, there's requirements. Other employees, I don't randomly test for marijuana. Unless you guys want to. I certainly can add it. You feel like,
It's legal.
yeah, I don't know. I'll walk in and right, get a cup.
We've been accused of a lot of things, but not that. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Number 8 is the proposed ACRO project discussion.
So we have a couple new folks on the village board, so we're gonna be reworking, or at least giving them an opportunity to get into that conversation. Then at some point in September, when we get back together, it would make sense for us to at least get an update as to where everybody is on their ARPA funds, because by then you've got to be pretty far into your decision-making as to how do you want to spend those funds, because you have to have the monies appropriated by the end of 24 and spent by 26. So I think the thought was to at least start to coalesce and have some understanding as to where things are going to net out, so that everybody, at least from our standpoint, from a staff standpoint, can make sure that the things that you want to spend your money on, we can make sure that they're appropriated in time so that we don't screw up the timing on the ARPA funds themselves.
Any questions on that? Seeing none, let's move on to the town meeting participation discussion. This is Bonnie and Rick's project.
There's not much to discuss at this point. We've been, for you folks in Saxtons, we've been, thinking about ways to make changes to our town meeting. Should we continue to have it in person? Should we try and, do it by Zoom? Should we dispense with it and have everything, voted on by Australian ballot on voting day, so forth and so on? So, the idea was to create some kind of a survey and try and at least get the temperature of the community on this. So Rick and I have been working together on a list of questions that we'd like to have on this survey. That'll pretty much be multiple choice with comment areas available. Some of them will be like agree, disagree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the simple statements like town meeting is a New England tradition and it's extremely important for our local democracy, or times have changed, blah, blah, blah. So things like that. So we've got, about 12, 15 questions, I think.
Yep.
And we'll be working on that. The idea is to do it through an online survey, promote that through the website and any kind of social media. And as we get closer, we might consider other ways to promote this survey, postcard to every voter or something like that, if you want to spend that money on that. And our thought is to have this survey ready to go by mid to late September. And it might be better time than now in the summer, closer to town meeting. So that's where it stands.
Right. And we're also taking a look at whether Westminster's approach of having it on a Saturday.
Right,
Instead
that's
of,
one of the questions.
instead of weeknights when people are tired or have whatever childcare, whatever issues they are. So we're also gonna put that out there.
And where to have it too, where this year we had right in this room, it was packed. Do we wanna go back up to the theater? Do we wanna consider the school? There's a lot of questions to ask and a lot of things for people to think about. And the board doesn't feel entirely comfortable just coming up with an answer ourselves. We want some feedback from the community.
You mentioned, whether it would be in person or by Zoom. Is it legal to hold the annual meeting by Zoom? My understanding was it's not.
It's a little convoluted because you can have a meeting by Zoom, but the people that attend by Zoom cannot vote if it's a floor vote situation. So if you're voting for items on the floor, those people that are attending by Zoom they can participate in the discussions, but they can't vote through Zoom.
But that is going to be an option in the survey.
And we're gonna discuss it, yeah, with, you know, that caveat, you know, in there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would only work if everything went on Australian ballot. Though.
Yeah, you know, that really wouldn't work too good unless you coupled it with everything, every vote going for Australian ballot on voting day, you know. Yeah, so you could still have an in-person and a Zoom discussion.
Yeah.
But then you have to vote.
Yeah, and of course, many towns are doing an informational meeting.
Right.
Wide open, but no votes.
Right.
And then everything by Australian ballot.
If you call it informational, I don't think anybody pays any attention to that. If you call it town meeting, at least there's more sense of, you know, at least turn on the computer and maybe listen and participate, you know. I don't think it's fair to call it informational. People say, I mean, you know, semantics are important sometimes.
Right. Any questions, suggestions, or anything for Rick or good luck? Fine. And does everyone know?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, we'll be coming back up. We wanted to bring the draft to our select board meeting in July. I don't know when our next joint board is,
The next gen board, I think, goes into September.
end of September. But we can provide, it. That'd be great. And we'll probably, put a draft on the website too, before we even finalize the survey.
So what brought this on? Lack of participation?
Lack of participation, as I always tell people, it all depends on the item that's on the agenda.
Right.
You put a merger on there, you won't have to worry about filling it. You just saw the response when that little word came out there earlier today. But, yeah, that's the thing, and the fact that we talking about having it versus upstairs more so than down here.
Yeah.
But that would mean electronic adjustments and changes the screen upstairs to, as you know, the past and lights has been terrible, they cut out.
Yeah.
The fact TV, and sometimes they just record it and you can watch it 3 days later after you've already voted, and it doesn't make any sense to watch it, but, it's that thing.
I'll tell you one suggestion, maybe we should consider this, I don't know how legal it would be, but my friend Charlie Hunter, suggested that, we hold a raffle, right? And everybody who appears in person gets a little raffle ticket, and at the end of the town meeting, there's a drawing, and that person is, forgiven their, real estate taxes for that year.
That might create some interest. But the interesting fact is
I don't
that.
know if it's legal. or not,
It's a last. Remember, both the town and village as well as farm both voted to have a floor meeting and abolish the Australian ballot. So, if it comes up on your survey, don't be surprised if it goes down and, I mean, people want to go to that meeting, they want to stand in and talk. If you have a Australian ballot, you cannot change the budget. You can't change any money items. Whereas you, at the floor meeting, somebody can come up and say, I want to cut 200 grand out of that budget.
Right.
They can't tell you where, but if it passes, then it's back to the board to tell you about where it goes.
I thought it was a great discussion at town meeting.
Oh, yeah.
About the issue, and that's, in my mind, where the impetus for considering these other approaches, time of day.
A couple of people at the town meeting said the discussion changed their mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Literally. So that's, do we want to give up on that? We're gonna try and craft this survey in such a way where people are really presented with the pros and the cons, what it means to go to Australian ballot. And, so forth and so on, what it means to like have 20 people decide all these things for you. So we're gonna work on that and hopefully come up with something that'll give us a good reading back from the community.
Jason, I hear your hand kind of flutter up there for a minute.
Westminster's is on Saturday, and we still struggle with participation. And Peter's totally right, it depends on what's on that ballot
Yeah,
and how many people you get. Typically, we have, like, Westminster Cares has, they have food set up from here to the other end of the building. And, the school will do lunch, it's $1 for, hot dog or whatever, so it's a fundraiser too. Kind of gets everybody together, it's a bit of a social event as well, but it does help in participation, and we always get asked for childcare. This year, it was a snow day and like it got all screwed up, but we typically have childcare available, so that's for community service for high school students, so.
but childcare, elder care, transportation.
Yeah, the high school's a pretty good venue because it's easily accessible. You can get in with a wheelchair, you can get around. The acoustics aren't that great, but it seems to work. You might want to look at that too, but it totally depends on what's on the agenda. If there's a hot ticket, it'll be filled. If there's not, there'll be 50, 60 people.
We've got more parking at the high school too than we do have.
Way better.
It has to be in the town of Rockingham.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, it has to be in the town, which really limits your places that you can have it done.
Yeah.
Where else, the parking situation and everything else that goes with it. This seems to be the main event, no matter how you look at it. You can't, school, parking on School Street,
Yeah.
Central School. Come on, you've ever driven the bus down there when the school was, I'm gonna tell you, it ain't no fun.
Yeah.
We could offer the triple play.
You guys take us out to school several years ago here.
Fundraiser.
I don't love FanDuel or anything else.
Well, the Bellows Falls, Village had their annual meeting a couple of weeks ago. And, we had a $1.6 million budget that was decided on by 36 people. And then the next day we went to the polls. It was an exciting election of trustees and village president. And there were, and I say that facetious because that's not a real draw. It's not the item that you talked about, the merger thing. But there were 200, a little over 200 people that came to the polls and voted. And the fact of the matter is that when you have to get the meeting to agree to put the issue on the ballot, the special interests that, for democracy, they come to the meeting and they vote it down. So I think we're stuck with the meeting. And I wish you luck on the survey and stuff like that. I just think that
Well, maybe we should really look at that raffle idea.
So might want to change the price though. That might not be legal.
So one more slightly red herring, third act, which is looking at climate crisis and particularly a senior citizen driven climate crisis, is talking about approaching high school by high school throughout the state to register seniors, to make a real effort to get that group voting. It is a group that tends to care about climate crisis. And I think that might have an impact on discussions like the one we're having, if we really had that voting group represented.
Okay, anyone else? Hearing none, let's go down to, for the Rockingham Select Board, would be to adopt a memorandum of agreement with the locals. This is the union, so the highway and town office.
It's also the village.
And the village, yes, have some, except for the police department. Okay, need a motion to adopt said document. It's been signed already. ends.
Move to adopt the memorandum of agreement between IUOE Local 98 and Town of Rockingham, just Town of Rockingham.
Sorry. Made second to adopt the memorandum of agreement for the union negotiation thing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carried.
I entertain a motion to adopt the agreement in front of us for water, wastewater departments. So I entertain a motion.
I move that the village trustees adopt the memorandum of agreement between the Bellows Village Corporation and the IUOE Local 98.
I'll second that.
Motion been made, seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the ayes have it.
Thank you for conducting the negotiation in town, those negotiations, a lot of time.
No problem, we had a lot of follow-up. Rest after, we went fairly easy. We go Scott nuts for a few downs, but he's fine. All right, review agenda for the next meeting, and that's gonna be on September 30th. We've got a couple of months to think about it.
The one thing I will say, September 30th looks like it's a Saturday to me.
I don't have my calendar in front of me. What's that last Tuesday in September, 28th,
26.
26th?
Yeah, I think it was a Tuesday.
Yeah, it's not the 30th, and you're right, Paul.
It is the 26th, and I have it.
Unless
Got it.
Bonnie wants us to have it on Saturday to see. Maybe not.
We're just wrapping around.
Try out the ref ideas, yeah. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, 26.
Like a motion to review and approve the orders, bills, and warrants, please, from the select board first.
So moved. Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the orders, bills, and warrants for the select board. Any discussion, questions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. No.
I would entertain a motion to approve orders, bills, and warrants for the village.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Opposed would say no. Ayes have it.
Hey, other business. Let's start with the trustee of Saxon River for a change. Matt? No, nothing? Alan? Amy? Looks like a fall on yourself.
Is there any more interest in following up with the DEI discussion? I saw that in the minutes, I'd forgotten all about it. The suggestion was that we look at the websites of other neighboring towns to see how they're using inclusion. I know that it was carefully considered with the town of Rockingham personnel policies. Did that just come to a dead end, or is that unfinished business?
I'd say it's unfinished business, yeah. We could certainly bring it back for an agenda item and do an update. One of the things that was proposed was bias training and some other things that the state offers. But the issue there is to try to do it, I don't know if the boards are interested in doing it at a board level, if you want us to do it at a staff level, so there's various options that are available and amounts of time and cost as well.
Yeah, anything?
All set.
Mine?
No.
Paul? Dick? Rick? So?
Nope, other than welcome to the new board member, trustees, looking forward to working with you.
Yeah. Like it, I think? Well, I have one. Wait, sitting over there.
Yeah, so I got two things. I'd like to just, we've already went over it, because I didn't get asked, but next meeting, review agenda items, next meeting, September, I'd like to have a discussion of the number of meetings that we ask our municipal manager to attend on a recurring basis, just however you want to word it. And the other item I have under this is, I've been asked to challenge every select board member here, when they leave here tonight, to go drive out Upper Meadows Road. Tell us what you think. Tell them what you think. Condition of it.
Up what road?
Upper Meadows Road, in Rockingham.
That's been in tough shape for a long time. I can tell you that.
So I've been asked, I told them that it wasn't a trustee item, that it was a select board item, but that I would be at this meeting tonight and I would pass their concerns along.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll say is I guarantee you that if any of us had to travel that road every day, you completely understand. Go drive it. Take a little road trip out that road tomorrow. Tell me what you think.
It's up Missing Lake Road, is it?
Yep.
Okay.
Upper Meadows. I'm just passing along. I've talked to 2 or 3 of the people out there, or actually over the weekend, that approached me about it. So I said, well, I'll pass it along.
Is it a paved road or a graded road?
Well, it's supposed to be paved, but you wouldn't know it.
Yeah, Peter's right. It's
as bad as the.
It's probably the worst road in the town of Rockingham. I can't think of any others that currently are as bad as that.
The boat landing runs a close second.
Well, maybe, but there's there's only a couple residents on that road.
Yeah, I know it,
But yeah, you're right.
they figured on that road. it's about the same.
I'm just passing it along. I was asked to do it, so I did.
Yeah, how many residences on that road?
I don't know exactly. I think there's roughly a dozen houses from one end to the other, approximately.
And is it a connecting road or?
No. No, it's dead end.
All right. We all set? Wade?
Yep, thank you.
Well, today I was approached as I got my papers this morning, by a Westminster resident who walks continually every day of the week about tractor trailers roaring down Atkinson Street and not stopping for stop signs. And he said, they can't see the goddamn signs. This was his physical words, this is exactly what he said. He said, those damn maple trees are blocking the sign. Okay, so I said, bring it up tonight, so we did. Andy or whoever, take a look at it, or maybe Cass Wright go up there and look at those things. So as I was leaving, and I got rid of him to go to my next appointment, I sat and the red light changed at the bottom of Red Light Hill to green to go up the hill or south. So the car starts down the hill and comes on, and I swear to God, this tractor trail truck had a corrugated box trail on it, and he must have been doing 30 or 40. And he almost nailed that car right into that intersection. It went right to the red light. Never even stopped. I tell you, I'm just waiting for the crash, because they will pick them up down there in the snow.
Well, I'll tell you, the stop sign, where the old church used to be on, I mean, you can see that stop sign, there's no trees, nothing's blocking that.
Well, this is one I just heard from him. He said, "When you roll right that street," and I said, "I look for him, so I can go, hold on, look at him."
Can't say one
He
comes
wants
to
to
mind
move
that's
the
blocked
sign.
by a tree branch, I really can't, but.
He wants to see
Take a
the
look.
signs again. I know he complained about the other one coming north on Atkins Street. And pointing out the flashing light that's on top of the light, the stop sign to attract their attention.
You don't like it?
That's not a message.
I'm just passing this, I'm just messing, don't kill me. There's no executive session, so I'll entertain the motion to adjourn. Any second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. We're out of here. Thank you all for coming.
Hey, thanks, Scott.
Oh, Jamie, I'm sorry, did you have another question?
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, so just in other business tonight, so everybody kind of breezed through, and it is a tri-board meeting for the LEMP, which I understand that's a state requirement. It's kind of a long overview, big overview, 10,000 foot of emergency plan to be able to get, money and resources reimbursed. But So are we gonna wait another 4 or 5 years to review the local hazard mitigation plan? Scott, I know I met with you and Sean, the second week of April. I was at the meeting, the Rockingham board. I sent an email out to all the tri-board, with the exception of the new board members for the trustees, with little to no feedback. So it's pretty apparent that the LEMP is for large scale events. However, we know that we're gonna run into smaller events. And I think the loss of Bellows Falls, power here, it kind of showed that there were gaps. There was a little bit of discussion here and there, but now, I mean, with the local hazard mitigation plan only being required to be reviewed every 5 years, are we just going to ignore that fact, or is somebody going to take the charge and, relook at that? Are we actually going to post it back onto the town website to where people know how to respond? Are we going to send out a mailing? If you have an issue, who do we contact? It's just, we have all.
We're adjourned. No, go ahead, Jamie.
So Scott, when we met, yes, you did address my concerns, April 11th or whatever.
Right.
But you didn't take any notes or anything, which is fine. I know you got a lot on your plate and everything, but here we are, and everybody's been talking about the LEMP and meeting at the tri-board, and we're going to discuss it. Understand, the LEMP is a 10,000-foot overview of a big event like an Irene. However, we all noticed gaps. We're going to have more gaps. We're going to have more washouts, whether it's rural Rockingham, Saxtons River, whatever. Everybody wants to respond and do the right thing. But I don't believe that 4 or 5 years waiting to review the local plan or waiting for another event is the right thing to do.
No, I agree. We can put it on for September for follow-up. Makes sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yep.
Thanks.
This meeting was recorded by Falls Area Community Television, located at 1 Hospital Court, Bellows Falls, Vermont. If you would like a copy of the meeting, our phone number is 802-463-1613, or email us at fact810@gmail.com. Falls Area Community TV, keeping government honest.